Good evening again, everyone, and welcome to CAWASA's Wednesday webinars. And this is number 22 in 2021 series. And this evening we have with us Mr. Nick St. George's, who is the Vice President for International Vice President of Integrated Sustainability Consultants. And he has attended the CAWASA conference, I think, in St. Lucia. And his company is an associate member of CAWASA. He's going to speak to us this afternoon on the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle for climate resilient wastewater systems in Barbados. And I think that is a current project that his company, Integrated Sustainability Consultants, are undertaken in Barbados. He has, of course, he is well decorated in his CV. He is a senior water and wastewater engineer with 25 years experience designing and performing construction supervising services for major infrastructure projects throughout the Caribbean and abroad. He began his career in 1996 as a civil engineer technologist, where his primary roles were focused in the field conducting services related to surveying, drafting using AutoCAD, and performing countless construction supervision activities. In 2003, Nick obtained his civil engineering degree from the Western University in Ontario, Canada. His international experience includes working on projects located in Ethiopia, Ghana, Belize, Guyana, in South America, Dominica, Barbados, Trinidad, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, and has been the project manager of the 3 R's climate resilience wastewater systems in Barbados over the past year. So I will not go into, I'm not going to elaborate on all his CV. I just give you a quick on that, but I can always circulate, but he has quite extensive knowledge and experience. So over to you, Nick, and welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. I look forward to talking about the subject. It's something that's very exciting, and it's going to make hopefully a big impact here in Barbados. And I hope this project that we're going to showcase and talk about today hopefully resonates with the other islands as well, and we can all chime in and discuss it. So I'm going to share my screen with everybody, and maybe somebody can confirm whether they can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Great. People are still chiming in, I hear.
Well, go ahead.
Let's see here. So an overview, what I'm going to be discussing is a brief history of reclaimed water around the world, and then looking into reclaimed water in the Caribbean, of course, more specific to what we want to discuss today, and then a review of our current project here in Barbados. And as you can see from a lot of the photos that I've inserted, I'm trying to demonstrate that, you know, using reclaimed water for irrigation, flushing toilets, and so forth, it's nothing new. We're not reinventing the wheel. If it's something that the Caribbean really wants to move ahead with, I think we can adapt from other countries that have moved forward, you know, using reclaimed water and adapt the rules and policy to make it applicable to the Caribbean. So I hope you get a flavor of this. Like, there's going to be lots of photos over and over again showing examples of reclaimed water being used, and the purple pipe, or purple color, is a designation for reclaimed water, much like blue pipe is for potable water, and green pipe for sewage lines and so forth. The other thing I just briefly want to, you know, touch on is, I think especially in the Caribbean, NRW NRW is low-hanging fruit, and so, you know, there's been a lot of talk about focusing on reducing NRW versus you know, bringing in new desal plants or trying to find water in other sources. And you know, I consider reclaimed water a low-hanging fruit as well, although it's not quite as simple. I think there's benefits and drawbacks to using reclaimed water. We'll get into that in this presentation. So brief history. The practice of recycling previously used water for repeated purposes has a long history. Early evidence of agricultural irrigation with treated wastewater can be found in Greece, dating as far back as the early Bronze Age, 3000 BC. The reuse of wastewater as a nutrient source in aquaculture has also been practiced in hundreds of years around the world. However, it's only been during the 20th century that planned water reuse started to be seen as an opportunity to increase the efficiency of water use and limit the extraction of fresh water from rivers and aquifers. For instance, early developments of engineered water reuse systems for irrigation are reported from the 1920s in California. And in the 50s, Japan started reusing wastewater for industrial applications. In the 60s, crop irrigation with reclaimed treated wastewater is becoming common practice in Israel and other Mediterranean countries. While in 1968, the city of, I'm not going to pronounce this right, but Windhoek, I think it is, in Namibia implemented the first advanced direct treated wastewater reclaim system to augment potable water supplies. And what I mean by direct is, you'll see in the next slide, and I include references to where I'm getting this information from. They're going straight from the wastewater treatment plant directly into the potable water distribution system, which is really groundbreaking. I don't think too many other people around the world or communities or countries around the world can boast the same. But I'll pause there for a second because I want everyone to reflect what that means in relation to what's happening right now. So for example, in Canada, I'll use that as an example because that's where I'm from. In Canada, we'll treat wastewater and we'll discharge it into an adjacent river. And in some cases, the treated effluent mixes with the river water and it travels a very short distance, in some cases only tens of meters, before it's drawn back in through an intake and polished at a water treatment plant and then distributed within the city's potable water distribution system. What I'm trying to get at is it's a mentality. As long as the wastewater has touched the river, even for a short period of time, and then drawn back in into the water treatment plant, then it's acceptable to drink. And the same can be said in the Caribbean, especially in Barbados where I live. If wastewater can be injected back into the ground and then drawn up at a water treatment plant and used, polished, and distributed, then that's acceptable. But it's interesting that as a culture, as a society, we don't accept that we can just take the wastewater right from the wastewater treatment plant and go directly to a water treatment plant, polish it, introduce the standards that are necessary, including chlorine and so forth, to make it potable, and then distribute it to the people. It has to touch the environment before it can be drawn back out. It's an interesting psyche, and so I think that's something that that we all have to get over. I think us who are involved in the water and wastewater sector have to be at the forefront of potentially accepting something like this. And maybe some of you that are listening to me talk aren't accepting it, and it'll take more convincing to see that potentially this is a solution for the future. But the other thing to consider is that it's not raining from outer space. I say that quite often actually to my kids, because they don't understand the concept that all the water on this planet has been wastewater at some point in time, whether it was the dinosaurs using it and then Mother Nature going through the process of cleaning it through evaporation and then raining and so forth to make it somewhat clean. All we're doing as engineers and scientists is shortening the time frame that Mother Nature takes to clean water and make it suitable for reuse. But it's the same water that's been on this planet. It's not raining from outer space. There's no other source of water. This is the same water that just gets reused and reused again. Okay, back to finishing this slide. In 1984, Tokyo Metropolitan Government pioneered the use of reclaimed water for toilet flushing in 19 high-rise buildings. Since the 1980s, thousands of water reuse projects have been developed around the world, and it is estimated that more than 200 water recycling schemes are in operation in the European Union. Focusing a little bit more on Namibia, this is where I've got the link below if you want to read about it a little bit more. But in 2002, they opened up their wastewater treatment plant that is treating the wastewater to advanced levels, tertiary treatment and beyond. And that water is being treated and gets directly distributed to the water distribution system. So from wastewater treatment plant to tap, so to speak. And it contributes approximately 25% of the total drinking water for the city, which is about 400,000 inhabitants. So it's pretty significant. Reclaimed water throughout the Caribbean. So although we are nowhere near at the same level of acceptance as Namibia regarding converting treated reclaimed water from a wastewater treatment plant directly to the tap, I believe that we can agree that the need drives the acceptance level. So what I'm trying to say is in Africa, in other parts of the world where, communities can continue to expand and the on the water distribution system continues to grow. Parts of the world run out of water, and I can tell you, even here in Barbados, during our dry season, we run out of water. I mean, not completely, but we run dangerously low, and I'm sure other Caribbean islands do the same. And as a result, the Barbados Water Authority has to respond by reducing water pressure, and also in some cases cut off certain areas of the country to water while still providing water in centralized locations in tanks, but making it a lot more difficult for people to have access to water. These are all, precautions that the country has to make when we're running dangerously low on water. And in fact, Barbados is ranked in the top 15 water scarce countries in the world. And this is in reference to PAHO 2012 and UNEP. So as the need grows and people become desperate for water, I think their acceptance level for considering other solutions also is in step. So wastewater reuse as part of the solution to regional water woes has come into the spotlight in many Caribbean countries, especially with the recent publication of related documents such as the Perspectives paper titled Status, Need, and the Role of Freshwater Storage in the Caribbean by a good friend of mine, and Valerie knows as well. So just some quick quotes from this paper. Wastewater represents a large stock of untapped resources, which, if treated and reused for secondary purposes, can lead to less reliance on freshwater resources and increased availability for storage. Paper notes the challenges is the financial implications and access to affordable, innovative technology to treat wastewater to a consistently acceptable standard, while noting that there is a growing interest for hotels to reuse wastewater in landscaping and golf courses, and even for irrigation of cricket grounds in St. Lucia. So, like I mentioned, this is a paper that was created by Anika Cole and Dr. Adrian Cashman and published in 2021. Water governance in the Caribbean has a distinct set of multi-level challenges, including unclear policy objectives and strategies and monitoring mechanisms, as well as unpredictable investment climate. However, things are changing and countries are gradually starting to better integrate water sector development with future national economic development objectives. I also wanted to mention in this slide, I get into rainwater capture, and that's not the focus of today's topic, but I just wanted to note it because that was also a project that Valerie was supporting integrated sustainability here in Barbados. We did a project looking at rainwater harvesting in Barbados, and I think that's another low-hanging fruit, of course. But the point of this slide is really to talk about some of the limitations. So in many Caribbean countries, including Barbados and Curacao, for an example, the hotel industry has led in the use of treated reclaimed water for irrigation purposes, especially in golf courses. But some countries, such as Barbados, the use of reclaimed water is very restricted. Current legislation does not permit reclaimed water to be used for toilet flushing or laundry, for example. There are current discussions to allow reclaimed water to be used on food crops, but the reclaimed water would need to be treated past tertiary standards and brought up to virtual potable water standards by introducing RO, which is very expensive. I think we can all agree. So on the right is a table that shows legislation that's already in place in various Caribbean countries to support rainwater harvesting, which in my opinion could be potentially blended with reclaimed water in some cases and used concurrently for flushing toilets, for laundry and other practical uses, including irrigation. And I guess, again, the legislation is only to show that we're not starting from scratch. There's a lot of countries outside of the Caribbean even that, especially in the Middle East, that use reclaimed water and rainwater harvesting. And we should be looking to not reinvent the wheel. We should be looking at legislation and policy that they've developed to circulate, a safe environment, and look to adapt those policies and legislation to make it applicable to the Caribbean is my point. And that table on the right is again showing that we are making progress. We're not starting from scratch, but there's still limitations. There's still, I think, a lot of public engagement and public training, so to speak, awareness and training campaigns to make sure that the people are comfortable with moving forward with other sources of water. Again, I think the need will drive people's acceptance level, and I'd like to argue that the need is only growing as climate change continues to affect water sources in the sense that we're looking at extreme weather patterns, whether it be when we do get the rain, it's flooding. And it's very hard to capture in some countries that don't have dams and so forth. And in other times, it's just pure drought, which I think we can all agree that the dry season is only seemingly getting extended. And so I think as the need grows, it'll be interesting to see how policy changes, because obviously politicians want to please the people to get reelected. And as the people become more vocal about how their need for water needs to be met, how potentially reclaimed water and rainwater, the use of both will become more a spotlight and change will happen. Okay, so the showcase, big project that we're doing here in Barbados. I'm really excited about this because this project kills two birds with one stone. And what I mean by that is in Barbados, we have two wastewater treatment plants. One only treats to primary level, which is just screening. And the Bridgetown wastewater treatment plant has secondary treatment. So it does a better job of treatment, but it's still nowhere near tertiary level. Both of them discharge to the adjacent ocean, which is no surprise. But if we can start looking at wastewater as a potential source of water to use, if it lead to potable, then we are looking to make changes that would stop the discharge of sewage going into the ocean, which is a huge deal, while introducing a new source of water. That's what I mean by killing two birds with one stone. We're stopping the pollution of the marine life, while also providing a solution to reduced water levels in our aquifers. So very exciting project. This project is funded by the Green Climate Fund, and it's managed by the 5 Cs. And obviously, the Barbados Water Authority is a major stakeholder in this project. So our project, it's been we started a little over a year ago. We're almost complete. We're just at the feasibility study right now. But this project has, and Valerie, who's on the call, was involved in stakeholder analysis, also assisting with the gender analysis, which I believe is a requirement for almost all the projects funded by the 5Cs and the Green Climate Fund. But our focus is really looking at the conceptual design, feasibility study, and upgrading both wastewater treatment plants at South Coast and Bridgetown to tertiary levels and beyond in order to try and safeguard the country towards climate change and allow the infrastructure to be more climate resilient. But more so, it wasn't just that. We're also just looking at the entire process of wastewater treatment and looking to reuse everything. It's really exciting, you know? So of course we looked at the sludge and can we bring the sludge to a centralized biogas facility, collect the methane, and with the methane, there's been further discussions. It's a side topic I could talk about because we're really chasing this project too. But you know, part of the gas that we would potentially collect, not just from the sludge of the wastewater treatment plants, but from waste from all sectors, meaning we'd be looking at waste from distilleries, from collecting manure from various, you know, poultry, cattle, pork, everything. So, and collecting all the waste into one centralized biogas facility. And some of the gas would be kept as a gas and sold on the market to potentially fuel biogas vehicles, while we still promote electric vehicles as well here in Barbados. But we've been moving away from gasoline. We've been moving away from diesel generators to produce our electricity. The methane capture at the biogas facility would be using part of that methane to drive natural gas generators that burn a lot more efficiently and produce electricity. So, you know, part of this project would produce electricity. Part of the gas would be used to fuel vehicles. So it's pretty exciting. I mean, we're really looking at the entire process of wastewater collection and treatment, and solving, you know, the pollution of oceans, solving the availability of water in the countries, helping to solve the problem of fossil fuels and electricity. I mean, you know, just from a wastewater treatment plant, it's really exciting. So, and just at the bottom, Dr. Adrian Cashman, who had noted earlier in the paper, is also on our project and has been acting as an advisory role, kind of overlooking the entire project. So I wanted to just quickly run through some of the recommendations that we're at right now at the feasibility study stage for this project. So there's a few. So obviously we are looking to recommend the upgrade of both wastewater treatment plants to tertiary treatment using, we looked at three different methods. We looked at conventional activated sludge, we looked at MBR, and we looked at MBBR, which is moving bed biofilm reactor. I don't think it's quite as familiar in the Caribbean. And ultimately, and this is going to depend on each country, of course, and there's multiple factors in the decision. Obviously, cost, operations, the ease of operation and maintenance, looking at the existing infrastructure, and can we convert some of the existing infrastructure to reduce cost. We chose to go with conventional activated sludge tertiary treatment for Barbados. We also need to include RO. And that is because we're like right now, the limitations in Barbados does not allow treated effluent as reclaimed water to be used for irrigation on edible crops. To get it to a level where the Ministry of Agriculture would consider it to be used on edible crops, we had to lower our TDS to 450 milligrams per liter, which requires RO treatment. So that is something that's going to be included. And I argue, once we start dipping into RO, we're really kind of starting to step into the water treatment side. if you look at wastewater treatment and water treatment as two separate boxes, now we're starting to overlap them, right? So CAS was deemed to be the most sustainable process with respect to lowest capital and operating cost, requiring minimal additional operator training, ability to reliably produce reclaimed water for non-potable reuse purposes, such as irrigation and refilling our aquifer, ability to repurpose all of the existing treatment infrastructure, and waste biosolids from the proposed CAS process has the highest renewable bioenergy potential of the three technologies that we considered. However, the RO treatment will result in the production of a waste brine solution that will need to be managed, and therefore we will have to discharge brine into the ocean. So it's not like we are completely stopping the discharge of a waste stream into the ocean. But instead of municipal waste, it'll be brine, salt water, obviously to a higher concentration. But on that quick note, I just wanted to talk about, I had an interesting discussion about discharging brine into the ocean, and somebody said something to me that had me scratching my head, and I just want to share with you quickly. They talked about like some of these monsoon rains that we get, like during a hurricane or a major storm event. You could argue that the disruption to the salinity level in the ocean is more than when brine is discharged from an RO system. Meaning, and when I say disrupt, it could be diluting by too much water, fresh water, or obviously with brine, it'd be introducing too much salt. But the fact that you're changing it from the norm affects marine wildlife. But if it's being diluted with too much fresh water, obviously it seems to be less of a concern during a heavy rain event than when brine is introduced into the ocean. It kind of made me think, on both sides, one is more acceptable than the other. And I'm sure that could be a discussion in itself, but it's just something to consider as we think, how harmful it is to introduce brine. Obviously, we have to be very sensitive about dilution and so forth, which we will be. Number two, groundwater recharge and agricultural irrigation are two of the many possible reuse water applications that could be considered. I think our report will also recommend other uses, but obviously policy and legislation would have to change. But suitable legislation pertaining to reuse water quality standards and other non-potable applications such as toilet, urinal flushing, dust and fire suppression. And when I say dust suppression, I'm talking about construction sites. It's a common practice to spray water on gravel roads to keep dust levels down. There's no reason why we couldn't use reclaimed water for such a purpose. And building cooling should be considered along with appropriate modifications to building codes for dual plumbing systems. So reclaimed water and the plumbing and changing building codes, I mean, that's a big discussion in itself as well. The image that I show in this presentation shows purple pipe, which is obviously something that you'd be using for plumbing purposes within a building. Obviously, I'm a big advocate of trying to introduce this into new build. I think if you try to rehabilitate an existing building and introduce purple pipe, it's a lot more costly, of course. But I think it'd be interesting because here in Barbados we have policy that basically says that any building larger than so many square feet must have a rainwater collection reservoir included. It'd be interesting if we also introduce legislation that required new hotels, for example, to include purple pipe as part of the development, and to also have a reservoir to hold rainwater and potentially reclaimed water, because we all know that most hotels do their own treatment on site. So it'd be interesting if they could charge the reclaimed water into a reservoir and use it for irrigation, for flushing toilets, and so forth. Just planting the seed. Number three, as the release of GHGs are linked to climate change, Reducing GHG emissions is an important consideration as well as country initiative, and include improving energy efficiency as well as implementing renewable bioenergy recovery from wastewater solids. The need for ground-mounted solar to reach carbon neutrality was also analyzed. BWA already utilizes some solar, ground-mounted solar and rooftop solar, but we would be looking, in order to carbon neutral, we'd have to introduce more solar, and it doesn't have to necessarily be on site. Of course, it could be anywhere in the country as long as it's tied to the grid and it's contributing to lowering the carbon footprint. It's further recommended to replace the diesel backup generator with a natural gas generator that have reduced GHG emissions. Number 4, regarding on-site wastewater treatment improvements, suggested improvements related to a concurrent initiative called the Roof to Reefs program, which is really looking to improve on-site wastewater treatment, because most residential homes and commercial buildings use either septic tanks tied to a soakaway field or pit latrines. And again, if I can pick on Barbados, about 95% of the country contributes their waste to septic tanks, soakaway fields, pit latrines, and only 5% is collected by wastewater collection system and treated at the wastewater treatment plants. So, I mean, we have a long way to go to try and change that balance and improve the wastewater collection system. And I'm sure it's the same in a lot of other islands as well. But the more we can potentially collect, the more we could potentially use for reclaimed water. But there's also an argument that we don't necessarily have to use piping network to collect the sewage. Another strategy that Barbados is considering is to have more RO brackish water treatment plants, much like the one that we already have that situated near the coastline. It's called the Spring Gardens Water Treatment Plant. And that water treatment plant is an RO system that collects brackish water from the ground. But because it's so close to the ocean, it's brackish water. Now, the quality of the brackish water is not pristine. It's in fact, probably, there's a report that has said that it's closer to the likes of the quality of the influent of any wastewater treatment plant. So that tells us that a lot of the soakaway fields and the pit latrines are not very effective at treating the wastewater. As we all probably know, for a soakaway field to be effective, the bacteria that are within the first 8 to 10 inches from the surface are really doing a lot of the work to break down the sewage and treat it. But as you get deeper and you get less access to oxygen, then the bacteria aren't working the same, and get to a point where the sewage reaches the coral stone and percolates away too quickly. And so it's showing, at least here in Barbados, and I'm sure it's similar to other Caribbean islands, although other islands are formed more volcanically, so the soil type is probably different still. You know, along the coastline, we've seen that the groundwater is still very similar to the quality at a wastewater treatment plant. And so if we were to plant more similar brackish water RO water treatment plants along the coastline, then you could argue that the coral stone is acting much like the wastewater collection system. And we're collecting it at the coastline before and intercepting it before it reaches the ocean. So we would potentially save millions of dollars in trying to install a piping network and use the ground, the existing coral stone, to be our network, and just make sure that we're trying to collect it. Now, it's not a foolproof system, of course. There's going to be wastewater that sneaks between potentially 2 water treatment plants and still makes it out to the ocean. But it's a way to save millions of dollars. And as we all know, a lot of the development, which is highly congested, is all along the coastline. So it's very very difficult to find a perfect silver bullet to solve this problem. Lastly, we also provide recommended upgrades to the existing operation and maintenance procedures within the BWA to improve efficiency and focus on preventative maintenance. Preventative maintenance will extend the life cycle of the equipment and help to reduce breakdown maintenance and costs. I'm sure, you know, CAWASA, you guys have heard lots about improving maintenance and trying to focus on preventative maintenance rather than being reactive. You want to be proactive. Ultimately, as engineers and as we work together with operators to try and design the best system for a country, we look at things that are very simple to run. I think we can argue that there's been lots of technology developed around the world. Some of them are extremely difficult to operate and maintain, but are extremely good at what they do. I think we have to balance technology versus the reality of trying to find something that's simple to run. It's expected to have a long lifespan as well, to reduce capital costs in the future and so forth. And so it's a balance of finding the perfect system, which is something that is always different for every country. So going back to what I said earlier, the need is really driving this whole system and what's holding us back potentially. Number one would most likely be public awareness and acceptance, right? So I think the government can announce whatever plans they want. They can believe everything that we say, but ultimately, if the people don't want it, the government isn't going to push it because they want to be reelected and so forth. And so we really need to start with the people. I think we can all agree there. And then the people are only going to feel safe if the government can prove that there's proper legislation and policy to drive the process and make sure that it's safe, right? There needs to be the proper standards in place. And again, we're in a position where we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's already lots and lots of legislation and policy around the world that we can draw from. We just need to spend the time to sit down and modify it so it's applicable to the community. Lastly, financing and capital funds are becoming less and less prevalent, especially from a capital point of view from the government's pockets. I think we really need to look at P3 opportunities, public-private partnerships, look to the private industry to support and kick in funds that are needed to drive some of these projects forward. I can tell you as an engineer working for a consulting firm that's privately owned, there's lots of attention and there's lots of excitement for the private sector to support and step in. Now, I'm sure a lot of you could probably give me examples of when the private sector stepped in and it wasn't a rosy picture. And then there's other stories where the private sector has stepped in, reduced cost, and you know, there's going to be good and bad stories, I think, on both sides. But ultimately, if the government has the proper policy and legislation in place, I think we can help reduce the risk on mismanagement and so forth, and really try and support the private sector to step in and drive some of these projects. All right, last slide. How does this impact operators? Because of course we have to tie this back to you. So adding a third class of pipe is really, in my opinion, one of the big concerns. So we're already managing and operating water lines. We're managing and operating wastewater lines. Now we're introducing a purple pipe. That's the third pipeline. You know, you could look at it that way and say, well, that means extra work. You know, you could also look at it as it's still water, whether it's potable, whether it's wastewater, whether it's reclaimed water, it's just water. We're just separating it. There is going to be additional infrastructure. More than likely, we'd have to train separate teams potentially to maintain reclaimed water versus we already kind of divide. In most cases, we divide our teams into potable water teams and wastewater teams. So maybe we're looking at introducing a third team. Who knows? But again, I think we could look at other countries, other communities that have done the same, see how they've managed to reduce cost and deal with this third class of pipe. and learn from their mistakes and move forward. But obviously, I'm very interested to hear more about this from your perspective. And that is it for me. So, thank you.
Right, thank you very much for this. Well, I think you have done it well within the time stated that you would. I will just open the floor now for questions from the participants, if there are any. I think increasingly this is becoming more relevant to us in the Caribbean. As we all know, some of the many challenges we face with treating with wastewater. And seeing it, as you indicated, as our friend Chris Cobbin often says in the crew program, that there is just one water. And increasingly, we have to be able to look at our options, particularly as our challenges with water scarcity in the Caribbean becomes more prominent. As you indicated, with droughts, and it's just still one water, but we have to begin to look at our options rather than just as just a new source of water, and not, as I think somebody has classified it, as new water and not reclaimed water. So this is all good. So the floor is open, colleagues. Please, if you feel free to ask any questions or comments you may have with our presenter, Mr. Nick St. George's. There's one thing you mentioned about, I think you said you also operating, or the proposal will include a biogas digester so that you can make use of the gas to generate energy.
Yeah, the government is really kind of taking that aspect out of the spotlight of this project, knowing that it's a big can of worms. And although we will be obviously mentioning this in our feasibility study, the government is really looking to separate this biogas facility as a separate project, and they will be encouraging the private sector to step in and help drive this project. But the government would be looking to provide the land and lease the land to the private sector. They would look to situate the biogas facility adjacent to the South Coast sewage treatment plant, because we would be looking to use some of the influent within the biogas facility, as well as taking the sludge, of course. So the biogas facility would very much be connected to one of the wastewater treatment plants.
There is well, something that we just launched in the Eastern Caribbean, that is with the French islands of Guadeloupe and Martinique, with a partnership with Cuba, St. Lucia, and Dominica, looking at constructed wetlands. In your feasibility, are you considering, I think you mentioned somewhere, or was it in this, that you would be, rather than using pipes, because of the coral limestone, how would you use it for as part of your network? I'm just trying to see how relevant would such a constructed wetlands fit into capturing water for reuse purposes.
Yeah, I think, wetlands have been used all over. I know in Canada we use them, and they're really more applicable to smaller volumes, of course. So I'm sure you're referring to in smaller applications, can we use them? Absolutely. I think they would probably do a better job than some of the soakaway fields that we currently have in place. Clearly they would, because the sampling that we're taking along the coastline of our groundwater is telling us that the quality is very poor. So something needs to be changed.
Okay. Yes, colleagues, feel free to put any questions, or you may wish to put them in the chat.
Hi, Nicole here.
Yes, go ahead, Nicole.
Right. Looking through the feasibility study, and you would have spoken at the end regarding the public's acceptance for the reclaimed water. But one of the concerns I have regarding this wastewater reuse and reclaimed water is that the practice in Barbados right now within the sewer system is you have a lot of stuff coming into the sewer system that should not be there at all. And I think that that is going to impact tremendously on the whole treatment and trying to get it to the level that you would like it to get to. So I know the fat soils and grease is an issue. I know the debris that come in rags. I know how awful it is, honestly. And I, like, in your study, the pretreatment part, has that been considered, noting what we see within the sewer lines, noting what we get at the bar screen? Has those things been considered?
Absolutely. Fog, fats, oils and greases are definitely a major challenge here in Barbados, and I'm sure it's particularly in the Caribbean and yeah. It again is not necessarily a challenge that is new. Definitely a prevalent one here in Barbados, especially, and has definitely been considered in the full treatment process all the way to tertiary treatment. You know, I don't think I'd be in a position to get into the details about that. Quite honestly, I've been told to limit my discussion about picking on the BWA and just keeping the subject about reclaimed water. But I can tell you that yes, we've definitely factored that into the treatment process. In fact, the fog is actually quite a necessary. I wouldn't say necessary, but it's a good ingredient to be considered within the recipe of the biogas facility. So the biogas facility, for example, we looked at collecting poultry manure. Poultry manure is very high in ammonia and so forth. We looked at the mass from various distilleries, which is a totally different kind of waste. And then of course the sludge from municipal waste. We have waste streams from many different sectors. We're trying to blend them together, look at the chemistry and find a solution that provides the best methane. And so, you know, using the fog, using the fats, oils, and greases within the biogas facility is yet another waste stream that would be included.
This very much actually goes to what we were talking about last week with Robert Haller on the flushables, and he talked about those things. So I think that Ignatius, he was saying, I wonder how much uptake there would be, and I think it's something that we really need to pay a lot more attention to in the Caribbean, is the flushables and the fogs. Nick, I don't know if you know Robert Haller's the executive director of the CWWA, and he's been leading the charge in Canada on flushables, and they've now got a memorandum of understanding with Kimberly-Clark that they've got some standards that they have to abide by, and then they will get a seal on their products. So this is why these webinars are so fascinating, because you come in from one end and you look at other things that we've talked about, and putting them all together, you start to see some, more holistic solutions. And next week, Rao is going to be talking about reuse water as well. So all of these are these 3 weeks are all very much interconnected. And I think that this is something that we need to do, is take a look at all of this together and how can we move this along? Because I think Nicole's got a very good point. We can put all the technology in, but it can really be damaged or not working as well as it could because of these other factors.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Val, for that input, because indeed this is where it all happens. And as we discuss, everything that deals with water and wastewater, not just in the Caribbean, but our ability using this platform to access, expert matter, professionals, on all these subjects and bring them together. It is where we can begin the processes as our operators become familiar with some of the initiatives that are being taken in different parts of the Caribbean and even globally, as we had last week with Robert Haller telling us about the flushables and other challenges with that and meeting standards. And so once we begin the conversations at that level, I think it can only get better by getting it out through the utilities and eventually making its way through policymakers. But I think it's good to begin the conversation. And the other good thing that we are doing is that this our webinars are being recorded, and we have been building this knowledge base of doing this repository, as it were, as we upload these, and other people can have access to that kind of information. So it can help with promoting this agenda as we try to clean up our waters in the Caribbean.
Yeah, and I can see that once COVID is over and we can start doing proper workshops again, because I think, you know, as we know, Nick, doing the workshops by Zoom is not as nearly as effective. But once we can start doing these workshops again, we can have these discussions and bring people in for much more in-depth discussions that say, okay, how do we address some of these problems and what are some of the options? And I can see that, you know, getting funding from IDB or CDB to put on some of these really vital workshops where there is this discussion, not just the lectures that are going on, but we take what Nick has said, what Robert has said, what Rao would talk about, and all these other people, and say, okay, let's take a look at having discussions between the utilities and coming to, you know, sort of how we can put some solutions together, bringing in some of the ministerial folks. Because that's how I think we're going to drive this forward, is being able to open that up rather than just have it, you know, today's the awareness and the some of the solutions that are there, but how do we drive that into implementation?
Yes, absolutely. It's of course we're working the water and wastewater sector, and where it's all about action, and it's not so much about talk, but we invariably would have to get on the ground. And I think there's nothing to beat the physical presence of meeting people and getting into actual operating plants where operators meet each other and can actually see some of what takes place at the various utilities. And there's no better learning environment than hands-on. So yes, indeed, this is, we look forward to getting back on track once we can keep COVID under control, as it were.
Oh, I think we're a little ways there. I hear that Barbados has just been put on the really top list of countries not to visit, Nick.
Yeah, I am well aware.
Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, COVID continues to be on the rise. I mean, we expected it with Christmas soon coming as well, because last year we were doing very, very well. And then after the holidays, you know, some tourists didn't follow the rules and were outside in England when they shouldn't have been. And we exploded here in Barbados again. And so it's been a difficult lid to keep on.
Yeah, well, it's a sort of common thread throughout the Caribbean. We're all going through this challenge where we had things because of lockdowns from the rest of the world. But as soon as you open up your borders, and with the challenges of keeping your economies going because of the high dependency on services, particularly tourism, then it really puts countries under tremendous pressure. But let us...
Because tourism is always, you know, I've heard a statistic, at least here in Barbados, that tourism contributes to about 40% of our GDP. And I always thought, well, I wonder how they calculated that. But, you know, COVID has really tested it. And I feel, you know, after the effects of COVID in Barbados anyway, there's a little over 40% unemployment. That number could be inaccurate by now, but this is a number that I heard a few months ago. And I thought, well, that's kind of a litmus test a little bit to, you know, how much revenue does tourism bring into a country? Well, you're seeing it in the unemployment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the sort of thing I guess most of the governments have to juggle with because of their even their fiscal spaces for them to they can't even borrow anymore, and there are not many more other industries And even many of the other industries are totally dependent on the tourism sector. The supply chains are dependent on tourism, etc. So it's quite complex and quite daunting for the region. But I think we have been resilient over the centuries. So we are still here in the Caribbean, and I'm sure and confident that we will pull through. But we must do that with keeping our waters clean and managing our wastewater systems, and so that we can get water, potable water for all. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you first, Nick, for giving us your time this evening after a long day attending the CWWA, and also to Valerie for, I know she's been up from early morning in Canada time to be at CWW, and it looks still bright by the
and I have to say
by
to
midday.
Nicole, when we gave you the training, we were in a heat dome. It wasn't icicles and snow that you said this
No,
morning.
no, Mike that did the water treatment, he showed us outside. He was freezing. I'm not sure where, I cannot pronounce where he said he was from.
Yeah, that was in January when we first
that was
started.
right.
Yeah, it was in the heart of the winter. Yeah.
Because so many people in the Caribbean thinks that it's just ice and snow, and it can be in the wintertime. But when we were doing some of the training, it was 40 degrees Celsius, and we were, up to 50 degrees Celsius in some places. And we had more deaths in a week than COVID. We had 600 deaths in British Columbia. And we've only had 1,200 deaths from COVID in 3 years or 2 years. So it was very hot.
Yeah. Oh, I recognize. I think Ezekiel, you wanted to make a point here in the chat just before we close off. Please go ahead.
Yes, the point I was making, Mr. Jean, is Mr. George said that public acceptance is key, as well as public awareness. But the interesting thing is, the less the public knows about it, you would have more acceptance. That's very interesting. If they know where it's coming from, more of them might accept it. But then again, you need to let them know, let them be aware of where it's coming from, public knowledge.
Well, that is definitely happening. I'm not allowed to say where I know that's happening. But it's a tricky thing, because if the public does find out, then the politicians are suddenly in very hot water. So
they're in deep shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So but there's that saying, ask for forgiveness rather than acceptance sometimes. And do you want to gamble that with politics? It's not an answer for me to make. That's for sure.
Yeah, but that's in the current era, there has to be complete transparency. So we can't go that route at all and even think of promoting it. But I think it is an area that will grow gradually. I think it will not happen overnight for people to accept. I think gradually we are seeing, because of the demands for water, particularly for irrigation in the first instance, again, because of the relationship with tourism in the sector, and where you have many of these golf courses and other types of amenities that are big guzzlers of potable water. I think it's a good opportunity to use some of that reuse, or to begin in that vein, to use reuse water for purposes of even agriculture, where we do have great demands as well, particularly during the dry season. So these could be first steps before you get further down into the actual potable water system for human consumption.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your participation. This brings us to the end of webinar 22 of the 2021 series of CAWASA Wednesday webinars. I'm Ignatius Jean, the CAWASA Executive Director. I'm signing off and inviting you to join us again next Wednesday. Have a good evening, everyone. Keep safe and well. And if you are not yet vaccinated, please do so. Wear your mask, wash your hands, and follow all the other protocols. Goodbye.
I saw Ignatius, 18% of people only in St. Lucia are vaccinated. So yeah, step up.
All right, good. Okay,
Bye, everyone.
bye everyone. Have a good
Bye.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
No problem.